Hello, my name is Chantel Baker. Welcome to my presentation. This is Perspective in Psychology, Unit 10. The content will cover a description of two psychological perspectives, an evaluation of the key assumptions of the identified psychological perspectives, an evaluation of the work of key theorists relating to each of the identified psychological perspectives, an analysis of the similarities and differences between two perspectives in psychology, an evaluation of the application of two perspectives to contemporary issues in psychology. What is behaviourism? Behaviourism theory began in the early 20th century, and it is a psychological perspective that psychologists believe. It is assumed that all behaviours are from learnt behaviour and is shaped by our environment. There are two types of behaviourism. One is radical, which is learning from a response mechanism, and another is social learning, which is a result of observational learning and copying our role models. Behaviourism believes that behaviours can be learned and unlearned, and it relates to the reinforcement directly by rewards of terms of operant classical conditioning. Behaviour is directed by stimuli and believe that changes in behaviour result from stimulus response associations by the learner. The stimuli response behaviourism. So behaviourists believe in stimuli response, an idea that learning and behaviour can be explained by interactions between stimuli and the responses they evoke. It was developed from conceptions of conditioning. A conditioning example is reward for good behaviour. Skinner argued that behaviour is learnt from our environment and influences human development. We learn how to respond through previous actions, and we have gone through before, and encourage our behaviour. For example, you microwave your favourite snack each day, and over time you may start to associate the microwave's ding with the smell of your food being finished, causing you to salivate. In this situation, the unconditioned stimulus is the smell of the food, and the conditioned stimulus is the ding. In operant conditioning, the stimuli response can, for example, be your teacher rewards you for good behaviour with a chocolate bar. This will encourage you to behave well to earn more chocolate. What is cognitive psychology? So it's a mental process of how we think, our memory of perception, thinking and forgetting. Optical illusion is due to perception, which can be defined as a result of stimulation of senses. It gathers all the information about our environment. The brain processes and receives certain things. So the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is where the cognitive process happens, and that becomes fully developed in our mid-20s. The key assumptions of behaviourism, which was summarised by John Watson in 1913. Behavioural psychology examines behaviours that can be observed and measured. Behaviours are primarily acquired through interactions within the environment, which is also known as the nurture approach. Animals and humans have comparable learning patterns, so humans can be experimented on as well as animals. Behaviours are examined and being measured and observed, and the behavioural approach conducts experiments that are mostly lab controlled in line with its objective and scientific approach to psychology. It's an understanding of what people have learned and how. So the lab controlled experiments have credibility, therefore there is little space for biased judgments of individuals or external variables to affect the studies objectively. Discoveries were made in psychology due to the precedent set by behaviourism. There are limitations on behaviourism. according to the behavioural approach, human behaviour is not influenced by cognitive through thought process. The approach eliminates biological factors as explanations for learning and performance behaviour. The key assumptions of cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology is how we as people comprehend, digest and organise and utilise information. Research in cognition was challenging due to the dominance of behaviourism in the early 1900s. The main assumptions of cognitive approach are perception. Individuals function as information processors involving input, storage and retrieval of data. Internal mental process causes behaviour and our schemas impact our internal mental process. So the key assumptions, so overall, lab-controlled experiments have credibility, therefore has little space for biased judgments, as I've said before. Discoveries were made in psychology due to the precedent of set by behaviourism, although there are limitations on behaviourism. Human behaviour is not influenced by the cognitive thought process. The cognitive approach is an idea of using experiments to study our internal mental behaviour. So cognitive psychology assumes that there is an internal process that occurs between when a stimulus happens and when you respond to it. There are two types of processing. Bottom-up processing, when senses gathers information from surrounding environments, converting information into action and then transmitting signals to the brain. Top-down processing uses knowledge, expectations, experience the world around us. Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist and he focused on the work of development of children and the understanding of children. The work was around cognitive development. So Piaget's key work, The Origin of Intelligence in Children, was published in 1936. This is where Piaget introduced the theory of cognitive development. Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 stages of development. So the first stage is birth to 2 years. This is a sensory-motor stage and they develop by engaging with touch, looking, listening and understanding their environment. Stage 2 is the pre-operational stage, using language and pretend play. Their thinking is egocentric and struggle to understand perspective of others. Stage 3 is concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years. They begin to think more logically and perform simple mental operations and understand conversations. Stage 4, the last stage, is a formal operational stage, which is from 11 years to adulthood. And they have the ability to think abstractedly and engage in hypothetical thinking. They can reason about situations, what was not part of their direct experience. And his theory had a major impact on modern education. Evaluation of Piaget's work. His strengths of his work were that his studies were cross-cultural and conducted studies with different ethnicities, which shows similar results, although all children progress through his 4 stages in similar ways. Piaget believed that children's ability to understand objects such as shake and a rattle was a cognitive skill that develops slowly as the child matures and interacts with the environment. However, psychologists today think Piaget was incorrect. Researchers found that even young children can understand objects and how they work before they experience those objects. And this was by Billigen in 1987. Piaget's methodology has had criticism in the area of development psychology. One concern is the limited size used in his studies, which they were all focused in all upper class European backgrounds. This raised questions about the generalisability of Paget's findings to children from diverse and cultural, socio-economical backgrounds. Critics argue that his lack of diversity in participants may have influenced the universality of Paget's stages of cognitive theory development. So B.F. Skinner he was an influential psychologist in behaviour, and his work became published in 1938. He developed the concept of operant conditioning and the Skinner box to study how behaviour is shaped by consequences. His key work, The Behaviour of Organisms, was published in 1938. Skinner introduced the concept of operant conditioning and reinforcement, which remains significant today. Operant conditioning refers to learning through rewards and punishment for behaviour. Positive reinforcement builds strength to behaviour by adding a positive stimulus, while negative reinforcement removes the positivity. Skinner conducted in-depth studies of rats and feeding responses, and they provided insights to principles of operant conditioning. So his work helped develop credibility as a quantitative science, challenging the dominance of psychoanalysis at the time. John B. Watson. He is famous for classical conditioning and the finding of his behaviourism in 1913. Watson and Rayner in 1920 conducted an experiment named Little Albert, and they applied the principles of classical conditioning to humans, and they introduced the fear of rats in an 11-month-old child, Albert, which you can see here. In common with most children, they displayed a fear response when he heard a loud noise. Watson made a loud noise to begin with, and Albert was not afraid of the rat. However, after pairing the noise and the rat, Albert became fearful of the rat. He had conditioned to be fearful of the rats, and Watson famously claimed he could take infants and children and shape them into being any type of professional through behavioural techniques like this. His famous quote was, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified will to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select, doctor, etc. Even beggar, man and thief, regardless of his talents." And he explained this in his 1925 book of Behaviourism. Similarities are between behavioural and cognitive psychology. So they both study cognition. Environmental conditions are studied between both. They both have principles in human learning and development. They both study cognitive processing to overcome problem behaviour. Both behaviourism and cognitive psychology are aligned with determinism to some degree. They both acknowledge the influence of past experiences, thoughts and behaviours, both generally associated with empirical research methods. So overall, they both are quite similar as they both study cognition. And they do have some similarities overall. It's contributed significantly to our understanding of human behaviour, although they do differ greatly in the assumptions. Cognitive concentrates on the mental process, and behaviours concentrates on the role of our environment. The differences between behaviourism and cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology studies mental processes like memory, perception, problem solving, whereas behavioural psychology focuses on observable behaviours and the impact of people's environment. It studies shaping behaviour through conditioning and reinforcement. So some of the differences are focuses on observable behaviour, whereas cognitive, like I said before, that focuses on the mental process. Behaviourism is a product of environmental influence, so there's classical conditioning, learning via association, which is a stimulus response, and there's the operant conditioning, learning via consequences like positive or negative reinforcement. The cognitive schema is a mental structure used to hold, store, record and recall information. In conclusion, while both behaviourism and cognitive psychology have contributed significantly to our understanding of human behaviour, they differ greatly in their focus and assumptions. Behaviourism focuses on observable behaviour and the role of environment, while cognitive psychology emphasises the importance of the mental processes. The contemporary issues in psychology and behaviourism. So contemporary issues are opportunities and problems that have a relevance in everyday life. Operant conditioning and observable learning. So observational learning plays a key role in reducing discrimination in places such as schools and workplaces. This approach involves having a positive role model who can demonstrate behaviours and encourage others to follow suit. So strengths. Teachers or business leaders who model inclusive can inspire individuals to adopt similar attitudes and actions. People often learn from their social environment, so observing inclusive behaviours can lead to social norm that supports delivery and inclusion. Weaknesses may not be enough on its own to create lasting change. Policies, systematic changes or educational programmes are often needed to reinforce inclusive practices. Contemporary issues in cognitive psychology. So there's CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, which can help with the learning and development, focuses on the changes we think and help to encourage more positive ways of thinking, is suffering from anxiety and depression. Training programs can help to address any issues such as productivity and performance in the workplace. It also helps with underlying mental health conditions. Strengths, there's a strong structure, it's short term, you can build up a strong relationship with the mentor or person helping. Weaknesses, it cannot treat all mental health conditions such as schizophrenia. It requires a lot of work and commitment, and not everyone suits this approach. So we have found that the strengths in cognitive psychology is that it focuses on the mental processes, providing valuable insights on how we think, remember and solve problems. It has practical applications which has led to effective treatments for mental disorders like anxiety and depression. However, it shows weaknesses as it relies on mental stages which can be difficult to measure objectively. Therefore, can oversimplify complex cognitive processes. It focuses on observable behaviour, which makes it easy to study and measure. However, unlike cognitive, it ignores the mental process and it neglects the role of thoughts, feelings and beliefs. Thank you for listening.